Welcome to Civic Engines. How are you, Dave?
Good. How are you, James?
I'm doing well.
So what are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about the American education system and, the Department of Education, there's talks of it potentially getting cut. And us as Chad libertarians don't really have a high opinion of the education system in its current state. So we're going to talk about, as maybe we're getting a head start on the reform of the education system that's inevitable in the U.S.
I'm a communitarian, James.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Me too.
Similar.
Anyway.
So what are your thoughts as far as they're doing cuts for the education system right now? So it's in context.
They're cutting the whole department is my understanding.
Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, and why do you think that?
I think it is, I think that our education system is already too uniform and doesn't perform very well. And the fact that it's centrally, the curriculum centrally defined, and the funding is kind of pushed through that, exacerbates that issue. And I don't think education even should be centralized and everyone should be studying the same thing. So that's kind of the 30,000-foot view that I already don't really like our system.
So as far as the standards go, like back in the day, it happened during Obama too. Where was there core curriculum?
Yeah, the core math. There was No Child Left Behind. I don't remember if that was with Bush or Obama, but basically the idea was, some kids aren't performing very well, so we need to make sure that the class as a whole progresses at the same pace, which is absolutely terrible because
we're not going to fail anyone anymore.
Everyone's going to slow down to the lowest common denominator, and we're not going to move on to the next unit until everyone is on the same page. And funny enough, kind of naturally with Udemy, with these online courses, we're already moving in a direction with online education that people can move at their own pace, and it's obviously way more preferable. It's not going to, if I am a slow reader, sometimes I have to read things 2 or 3 times. Why is the whole class waiting on me to read through this chapter when someone else can blow through 3 or 4 chapters and comprehend it totally fine? Mm-hmm. And I'll surpass them in math. And, it's like the worst of all worlds is for everyone to have to slow down. The kids that would be advanced are bored out of their mind and not paying attention. And, people are individualistic. They have different interests. They have different things that they would like to learn. And that kind of goes into the other issues that are less systemic with our education system. That I'm sure people have heard that our school system is actually modeled after the Prussian factory model. And so during the Industrial Revolution, the Prussian government had an interest to make the population as industrious as possible. And so they kind of turned their education system into pumping out happy little factory workers. So think of some of the things unique to our schools. It's like, I mean that you wouldn't interact with outside of school. It's like everyone's sitting in a chair, everyone's sitting forward. You single file line from room to room. You have to raise your hand if you want to answer a question, even answer a question, let alone ask one. No. You have to ask permission to use the bathroom. But the most important thing is that you are graded, and you are graded on your capacity to regurgitate what the authority figure at the front of the room says. So however accurately you can regurgitate that determines your grade, your quality of how effective of a factory worker you'd be, and how advanced the skill sets that you'd be working on. I don't know.
Like, what subject matters would help a factory worker? Like, what do they... what did they have for like their curriculum back in the Prussian factory model?
Well, certainly math and arithmetic. And
Why would a factory worker need to know any of those?
Measurements.
Yeah, I suppose you had manual stuff back then.
And they used to have more manual classes like wood shop and auto shop.
But I wonder when it comes to mathematics, that pretty much is regurgitation, because there's only, for what they're teaching, there's only one correct answer, unless they're answering mathematical theorems, and doing that kind of.
Yeah, and it's weird because we
work.
kind of shoehorned this Prussian model from what was naturally a liberal arts education in the U.S. It was more about, it was post-Enlightenment with like, I think maybe one of the primary goals in kind of the prairie schoolhouse model was like literacy and reading the Bible and being a civilian, being, appreciating literature and, how do you form an identity around that? And so I think that is kind of why the literature tradition continued forward. And then as far as mathematics, that is just unambiguously useful in industry.
I don't know that it's bad.
That what's bad?
That the Prussian factory model is as applied in the U.S.
Well,
because
go ahead.
Math and science is what we're doing crappy on, right? And like modern day, now not to you and me possibly, but it would be considered that right now is our liberal arts golden age, right? I don't agree with that, but from most standards, there's inclusivity and everybody's doing these new inclusive liberal arts or whatever. You have more graduates certainly than college graduates than ever before, like something like 2,000 times more. Of course, there aren't that many jobs to go around. So, I mean, I think in one aspect that's correct, where like if you take the Prussian model and put it towards liberal arts, whereas it's not meant to be, then you're basically just regurgitating, and it completely defeats the purpose of liberal arts, whereas I think it did like for their purposes in math and stuff. I mean, in the military, we have a kind of system like that, like with ask permission and stuff, and that to me, when I was in it, seemed like it worked pretty well. Yeah, it seemed fair to everyone. Everybody raises their hand. Everybody, learned respect for one another and to wait, and like it's basically like learning values and whatnot. It may have taken away some individuality because that's the purpose of the military. So I'm wondering if it's just like the worst of two worlds that we have for our education, where the Prussian model in Prussia at the time possibly wasn't that bad, but bringing it here and what we applied it to is real bad. What's your thoughts on that?
I think it served its purpose at the time when there were all of these factories for people to fill into and have a dignified middle income job. My main problem with the Prussian model and why I don't think it serves us now is because it is authoritarian, and it's grading you on your ability to accurately regurgitate what the authority at the front of the room tells you, instructs on you.
Oh yeah.
And so you don't, unless you go into a university degree like engineering, and probably arguably medical, you're not going to learn critical thinking. You're not going to learn to like fail against a problem and challenge your own assumptions. It's more you're trained to like, well, this is what the authority, the expert says, and so I am the most intelligent person if I can reflect and regurgitate what they told me, and I don't even have to think about questioning, well, what if what they told me, is incomplete, or outdated or
Oh, they get annoyed. I mean, in
empirically-
college, professors, like if you like say something contradicting, and like say this doesn't make sense to me, and put a different viewpoint out,
Oh, yeah.
they get annoyed as hell.
Yeah, so it follows all the way through.
It's like, how dare you think for yourself? This is the way it is, and I'm telling you, and like, but this and this and this don't make sense.
Right.
Where if you point that out in a STEM field, you'd be like, oh wow, you're right. You know, you've got p values on your sample data, and
Well,
they
it's
fit
hard to
within
argue against the reality of like, does this thing fly or not? You know,
right.
So, but yeah, those teachers are in a discipline that interfaces, challenges itself against reality too, and so they've been humbled. And it's not some theoretical thing where they never had the chance to like be proven definitively by reality that they were wrong. They were, if they're an engineering professor, they were probably in the industry, and they did actually fail multiple times a day to get to the bottom of a problem before it finally worked. And so, again, they learned critical thinking, and they learned that it's not a failure on someone else's part because they take a different approach, because they disagree with the all-powerful teacher, and the teacher could and is wrong many, many, many times before they solve a problem, at least as far as engineering goes. Now, here's another issue with the education system that you keep touching on, is that the standards have been loosening over time.
Right.
And I think that probably came more from the university side as just a cynical business. They want to keep butts in seats. And so before college, in the public school systems, I think it's more the parents would get angry if their children weren't performing well, and during the PTA it would cause kind of these social pressures, like, why are you failing my child? What's wrong with you? And I think that kind of was a spillover from the overprotective parenting in the 90s, doing away with the latchkey kids. People are having less kids, so they're more protective of the kids that they do have. When you have 8 or 9, and some of them die to polio, or some of them, whatever, get shipped off to war, you're less micromanaging about any individual kid's success. But when you only have 1 or 2, and you start having kids in your, late 30s, you want to naturally make sure that kid has the best opportunity possible. But then, I think kind of naively, parents, at least in this more overprotective generation and what became fashionable, became overprotective, bubble wrapped everything, didn't want their kids to ever have to experience even uncomfortable things like failure, losing at a sport, failing at their grades.
Helicopter parents.
Yeah. And so that's kind of why the public schools have loosened their standards. But through university, they don't want to expel kids because there's money in keeping them in the pipeline. So I think that's a big part of why standards loosened there.
Do you think No Child Left Behind was a result of that, of just those kind of parents back in the day, a generation of parents where they're like, oh, this is what the parents think, so we're going to put this No Child Left Behind thing. So basically,
I think it's the same naive thought process of, it's so painful when our kids fail, and so we're just going to define things in a way that they don't fail. It's like, okay, well, they're playing a game it's like when wolf puppies play and wrestle with duller teeth than adults, what they're doing is they're practicing against a skill that's eventually going to have real life consequences.
Right.
And so it's like if helicopter wolf parents made sure that they took out all, dentally removed the teeth of the puppy so that there was no chance that they ever get a scratch or anything. And so they're in this safe environment, but then when they're adults, they don't have teeth and they can't hunt anything.
What generation was that? was that parents? Were those parents Generation X parents?
Jonathan Haidt would say that started in the kind of the 90s with there were some child abduction scares. And so parents started to get obsessed about the well-being of their kids and like not letting them play neighborhood games. And then I don't know quite how that. He also talks about how allergies went on the rise. That might just be coincidental, but it's like, you know, now peanuts aren't allowed in the class, and now kids have even less exposure to peanuts. And
So that would be Generation X parents, basically.
yeah, and maybe younger boomers.
Younger boomers. Well, that's if it happened in the 90s, I wasn't a kid.
I was a 90s kid, and my parents were boomers, so
Oh,
yeah. But we also played neighborhood games.
that's so weird.
So we were like the last generation that played neighborhood games before like the smartphones and everyone's online and parents aren't really comfortable with their kids free ranging outside anyway. But
Yeah,
then they're not practicing all these real world skills.
It's weird because my mom's Gen X and I'm Gen X, and
Oh,
your
yeah.
parents are boomers and you're a millennial.
Yeah,
so
we've
it's
talked about this before where
what?
she was just at the beginning of X and you were just at the end of X. So
Yeah, so
But-
90s for me is when I was in high school. And we pretty much did whatever the hell we wanted.
sure.
But that must have been the younger kids in the 90s when it started, because high school's just like, go do what you want. Don't die, son.
Good luck, yeah.
So probably like late 90s, possibly like right. I didn't notice a huge difference. That's interesting. What do you think about standardized tests for colleges, such as organic chemistry tests? Because I never went to one organic chemistry class, because it's like 60%, 70% of your grade is going to be based on your standardized organic chem tests. So I didn't go to class, and I just got like a 20 or 30%, and then
Funny.
went in, took the test, got an A- on the test, and so I ended up with a B. It's like, do you think that's if because I love studying on my own. I hate going to classes because you're really not learning anything more in classes than you are from a textbook, in my experience, for the most
Sure,
part. So
fair
it's
enough.
like, I mean, if you're gonna,
And it would be kind of a problem if the teacher did teach stuff outside of the textbook, and it's like that's not something that the kid can go back and reference and re-study on.
well, especially
preparing
in
for the
STEM,
test.
you know, what
Yeah.
what else are they going to teach you in STEM? Maybe they've got some allegory notes
Yeah.
or some.
No,
some
and that's
nice
a good point. I
stories.
do think standardized tests are helpful because there are jobs that require higher cognitive performance, and you want to make sure that there's a filter in place that, yeah, these kids performed more consistently against more complex ideas, or they had a better appreciation of how these systems are in place. They're able to retain the information more reliably. So I do find standardized tests useful for those high-skilled medical engineering jobs. But then there's also a component that isn't explicitly tested, but isn't explicitly taught. I don't even know if you really can teach critical thinking, but there aren't opportunities for a playground setting or whatever for kids to develop critical thinking until maybe college, if they incidentally go into a field that requires
Well, just
that.
have a teacher say the wrong thing or say something ridiculous and see like how many kids be like, teacher, that doesn't make any sense.
It's like,
You know,
Yeah.
that would be like,
You
could
passed.
teach it.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it's like, hey, kids, question me type of thing.
that would be a really good way to inoculate kids against like authoritarian regimes. Is like have like these almost fire drills where the teacher insists like, no,
Right.
this guy is yellow. And it's like, that's a dumb kind of example, but it's like they
Oh.
insist on something counter to what they said a couple weeks ago, counter to the actual material. And are the kids actually internalizing and integrating this information enough to push back even against an authority figure and say, no, here's all the evidence that shows that even though you're the one saying this, I have conviction to say you're wrong,
I think there was actually a TikTok where the teacher was like, the sky is blue. And the kid was like, no, it isn't, teacher. It isn't blue. Because the sky isn't blue. It appears blue to us because of the atmosphere. But I mean, that could be said for anything. You know?
Right.
But at the same time, the teacher got ticked. You know, and he didn't like explain it and explain how like pedantic the answer was or anything like that. He just got ticked at the kid when he should have said, you know. I actually do that to my nephew all the time, because when we have vegan, because they get ticked about like, I wouldn't say that it's a religion to them, but then, you know, I point out problems with veganism as far as
why it might not potentially be so environmentally friendly as you'd hope, or
well, no, it's like more like if like the average human, they're like, I don't eat any animals or whatever. It's like the average human eats how many bugs accidentally per year. It's like, no, you know, you eat bugs, right? You don't intend to. And then I was talking about, do you drink sodas? How about dyes? Like, do you eat foods
red
with
dye.
dyes? Yeah, red dyes. It's like you eat bugs like basically all the time, no matter what kind of confectionery glaze. They eat a lot of. Anyway,
Education.
to get off the bad news, yeah. No, but we're just talking about like how people critical thinking, because a lot of parents,
that component is sorely missed in our education system, and it's really important if you're going to be a
parents,
active
the point of the veganism
participant
thing
in a
is
society.
that parents ingrain what they want their children. So parents end up doing the same thing as a lot of the teachers are doing. It's like don't letting the kids. That was the point of the veganism thing. So I'm wondering if that has to start at home, or where that can start to improve, you know, whether you have some stellar teachers that actually, you know, do that, introduce critical thinking early on, or if the teachers, maybe are the parents, you should have awareness for the parents and be like, hey.
It's a great question too, is like, where in the separation of, or the share of responsibilities, what developmental skills should be done by the parents, what should be done by the teachers. Like, we never have even a conversation about that. Should we have a system where parents can come and go and play in a group classroom environment with their kids? I know there's a lot of models where you know, the different ages of kids are grouped together, so they'll have their split off more advanced math lesson, whatever, but then they have a homeroom where it's like kids from grades 6, 7, and 8, or, you know, 5 through 1.
That's a Montessori school model. I don't even know what that is.
Montessori is more learn through play. It's almost like a
horrible.
technical college.
I don't remember learning anything when I was.
I like the Montessori model. It's less structured, so you probably, if you are a naturally creative person, naturally curious person, maybe it's the same as what we're talking about with these online tutorials, where it's like you could probably get hyper advanced if you're a naturally curious kid, but if you are, I don't know, an average kid or lower, maybe you do need that structure and it's not there. And those kids, it's like, okay, well, you were basically just at a glorified, you know.
I think the problem with it is that every
daycare.
Single Montessori type teacher I've met, not a single one has been a STEM person, right? They've always been.
Fair enough.
Go dance around and learn this other art history thing or something, rather than like, hey, you know, hey, let's sit down and try to do a mathematical proof or something like that.
I think I have to look more into it. Maybe.
Well, did you go to a Montessori school at all?
No, we looked into a couple. We haven't even toured any yet. But
it could have changed since I was young. But we did. Yeah. We did challenge courses too, and things of that nature.
So you were in one?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying from experience. It's like, I didn't learn jack shit. But did I have was I challenged in ways I wouldn't have been? Yes. They had quite a few. That's where my fear of heights came from, actually, because they had us do like
high ropes courses.
Yeah, basically. It's a cliff. There's a cliff and a log going across it in 2 nuts, and then you're probably like 6 or 7 stories up, and you're a toddler. You're not a toddler. You're in like early grade school, right?
That does sound pretty traumatic.
No, nothing on you, nothing to protect
What?
you, nothing.
There wasn't
right?
a safety net?
No,
Four
no.
stories
There was
down,
a safety net on both sides of the log, but still, no,
Yeah,
like
that's
nothing
crazy.
else.
Okay. Yikes.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Well, and that kind of dovetails into one last critique I really have with the education itself is, yeah, there's recess, there is play time for the younger, but there's like no time for, I don't know, I don't think there's enough as far as social development, opportunities for kids to interact with each other, especially as you get into high school and beyond. It's all just classroom. Everyone's sitting forward one direction. They try to minimize interaction because it's a distraction. But
I hate that shit though.
Yeah.
Because if you think of college, like when they make you do groups
Mm-hmm.
of that 4 things, it was just, I didn't work well with others. It's just like, okay, no, I'll do the whole thing, and not, because I think groups,
That doesn't
especially
surprise
if you, well,
like, I'll just do this whole project. You just go away. Don't talk to me.
if you have groups, right, you're kind of doing the same thing, I think, with the standards, is that the highest person in the group is going to be stuck making the difference between the lowest person in the group, explaining
But you never
things.
pick your group. It's always assigned to you.
Right, that's what I'm
It's
saying.
like
though.
if you could choose who your business partner was, or your, I don't know, engineering partner or whatever, it's like, I'm sure the results would be a lot more
Yeah, but they want to
productive
even out
and-
the groups,
So you-
It's like, oh no, here's put the smart
back
kids
to
with
equity.
the right, and
Yeah.
that's my problem with groups. So I mean, if it could be done in a better way, I'd like it, but not so much. So what do you think about
the slashing of the Department of Education?
yeah?
I think that there's a lot of controversies in, one of them being abortion, where it's like there's people on one side and there's people on the other side, and they both passionately feel a certain way, and they are afraid to even explore the other side. And for any of these controversies, I think it would be preferable if we implemented competitive representations, let them play out in a more decentralized way. So it's like, yeah, I would prefer, if people are unhappy with the education system, to let states experiment, and maybe we'll go with a Montessori model or a mentorship model, maybe, I don't know, self-defined, kind of let the kids set their own education based on what they are passionate about studying, and try and find their own mentor. There's all sorts of things that we could be experimenting on, and instead we're on this stuffy Prussian factory. Everyone sit forward, standardized tests, but we're afraid of the results, so let's make sure everyone passes, and like you said, worst of all worlds type situation.
Should we be doing something like China or Japan, where you have up to a certain grade and you just leave it to the kids, pass, fail, or whatever, and then if you don't,
there's a lot of suicide that comes out of Japan and China if you don't make those standardized tests. And,
well, that's part of the cultural thing too.
Yeah,
There's always
true,
been a lot of
true.
suicide.
But sorry, what were you saying? They do get to pick their own curriculum in a large way, or what?
Well, I mean, it's no, they just won't get into any school. The people that they'll be forced into areas where they better fit in my opinion. I don't think it's the best system, but you aren't going to get people, like if there's only one slot open or very few slots for art history or something like that, and you have 4 people, you're going to have the standard to get in. It's going to be ridiculous.
So you're saying in these Asian cultures, there's a very finite amount of seats because they know we don't want to oversaturate the industry, even if, so we're going to take the best for any of these. And maybe there's a personality test or something that slots like, okay, these people are better suited. Is that part of it?
Well, they have academic tests, I think, at the end of middle school to get into better high schools even.
Oh, yeah.
So
That's a lot of pressure.
even like when you're in grade school, get into a better middle school, and then you got to get into a better high school, and then you got to get into a better college, or else you end up in one of these other kind of things.
Well, and then there's also if people are motivated to instill a political ideology into the education system, they can use the federal funding as a mechanism to encourage states, schools throughout the states to conform to that ideology. And I think we saw that with DEI. And I didn't like that. And I would rather the states manage their own money, that, no strings attached. Who knows if Trump, he could very well do a sleight of hand where he's like, well, we're getting rid of the Department of Education so that the money's just going to the states and they choose how to distribute it. But you could very easily see him just slip in there, well, and also we're going to punish the schools, the states that don't agree with our agenda.
He's a bit,
which he's already doing with the Title IX. Is it Title IX with the
female athletes?
Yeah, the female. Yeah. So it's like you're already doing what you criticize the Department of Education on, is that they're distributing money to these schools on the condition that they conform to your political ideology. And now you're doing the same thing with Title IX, as you're saying, I'm going to destroy the Department of Education because it's distributing funds with ideological strings attached.
Yeah, but Title IX is actually a law rather than something that's ideological purely. If they wrote that into law and they were giving funds based on a law, but that law would never be passed.
I also just don't know how that's going to move forward. He has this executive action, no schools will get funding. But then if that was implemented through the Department of Education, and now he's gutting that, and now just giving it to the states to distribute, well, then why can't they just go against his executive action now? Because now you got rid of the executive vehicle that you had for distributing these funds.
No, you can. That was the point. You're not going to get any national funds unless you follow it. The money goes to the states. They can do whatever the hell they want.
And then directly on top of that.
Same thing as abortion, basically. Yeah,
Okay.
that's the whole conservative model, is they want everything to go back to the states, not to have this centralized federalism. Yeah, and I mean, I don't disagree with it, because I'm, like I said, more communitarian. I think if you've got a place with a lot more trades and whatever, might want to encourage a lot more trades for what you need. Like Wisconsin has a lack of rural doctors or whatever. So
sure,
that gives Wisconsin, more purchase to actually go out and give incentives for having more rural doctors and things like that. And I think it's much better suited. I mean, if you look at the national or the colleges and national institutions now, should 20 to 40% of your student populace be foreigners? I don't know about that. That's a huge percentage to me. I think it should be more like 10%, 8 to 10, 8 to 12, something on that.
When you just moved away from it, but it's a great point that, a big part of my problem with policies is that they are generalized prescriptions for problems that are often very situational. And so it's like, if you had a water crisis in California and they kind of happen to, control the levers of federal policy at the time, and it's like, okay, we're going to limit the water usage after 5 p.m. It's like, okay, well, that makes sense in California. It doesn't make sense in Wisconsin, where there is no water shortage. Right. So why are you applying this on a federal basis? So if the money does go back to the states, then they can start to institute things that make sense in those environments. You can have more, more agricultural training if it's an agricultural state, and you can have more fine business, business degrees and stuff if it's New York or one of these more metropolitan areas.
Right.
If it's a tech heavy state, then obviously maybe that would be kind of a mecca for, let's move here because our kid's interested in engineering, and that's where the leading engineering high schools and middle schools, and this will give them the best head start, is if we move to that state kind of thing. But mostly I'd be interested in, I think a lot of people are unhappy with our education system. Maybe I'm being presumptuous there, but I think there's a lot of really interesting ways it can go in if there was the ability for people to try and experiment and compete that we're just missing out on.
Yeah, I think we should specialize earlier because our general education isn't working anyway with math and science and comprehension.
True. And there's no mentorship. And
by specializing early, you could get better mentorship because you're going into a specific subject rather than this whole general thing, and you could learn probably skills and the thinking around those skills earlier, which I think would be beneficial. But then again, I mean, if we consider, like, everybody thinks, not everybody, but a lot of countries think we're stupid, Americans are stupid and fat or whatever, but it's like, that's as a percentage, we still produce more intelligence, intellectuals, and fit people than other countries do, just by a means of our population. That's compared to, like, European and whatnot. I don't know about, China and et cetera, but that's when they say America's so fat. It's like, we've got the most fit people in the world. Yes. Both the answer to both is yes.
Okay. Yeah, I forget what that's called, where it's like the extremes are more pronounced, and then the middle is like, there's less people in the middle.
Well, our middle might even be big. I don't know that. It might be that, but it might be just that our population, we've got bigger percentage of all three, especially when you're compared to European countries, because they're like the size of our states, smaller in most cases. So depending on the state, of course. But so how would you solve it differently than the current administration is looking at solving it? Or let's say,
well, I think them killing the Department of Education kicks off the opportunity for these. It opens the door, I think, to, like, well, what would ideal education system look like? Does the factory model really make sense now that there's barely any factory jobs anymore and it's getting overtaken?
Right.
Even if we reshore, it's still competing against AI and factory automation. That's not guaranteed to be a dignified high income job forever, and increasingly into the future it's going to be less and less. And then there's all these fields where people are like, we need way more people in these fields of social care, like retirement care. We need people, I'd say, more in the trades again. No one knows how to service an elevator. Roofing is really expensive. I'd like to see more people there so that I could hire someone for cheaper.
Right.
HVAC, all of these fields are going to get, like, crazy expensive. There's an episode of South Park where they're all sitting in front of Home Depot and, like, would you be able to, like, fix my HVAC? I could, like, do your taxes. And, it's like it flipped where, like, the blue collar worker was super rich and, kind of bid up his contract because no one knows how to do these skills anymore. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to reverse that. We need to start, I don't know, white collar jobs look like they're on the chopping block. And that isn't to say that, I don't know, skilled trades where people are working with their hands. I think those are still going to have a lot of demand, but
I think even sports should be removed from education. You should take things like sports away from and, like, have it separately as a separate entity. Because you look at other countries, they have clubs and whatnot that are separate from their institutions, don't they? I mean, I don't know that 100%, but does, like, Cambridge have a soccer team? Maybe they do.
I'm thinking maybe if people could choose to develop in what way they want, why not have schools that are sports heavy? Because there's a lot of social skills that you can build off of that, fine motor skills.
No, because most people aren't going to do that for a profession. I mean, it kind of makes it educationally. I mean, that's for like what, the 1% of the 1% of the 1%.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't think that, at least in public schools, I don't think really that has a place. Maybe in private schools.
What I'm saying, maybe we should get away from public schools anyway. I would like to see a lot more experimentation as far as all the different ways people educate themselves or their children.
Like clubs and stuff. So I wonder if, because why should you be paying any additional tuition for anything that's outside of like your education? Like, because half the time your increase in tuition is tied with like, oh, we're going to build a new football stadium or,
true. Okay.
Things like that.
Well, and this slides into the next thing that I think would be a good clip is how education is funded.
So what about the school funding? Where do most of these schools get their funding besides what I just mentioned with, increasing tuition for like football stadiums and stuff like that?
Sure. So it's separated out into, I guess, private funding, public funding, public school funding, more primary schools before college, and then the universities, and those are a totally different animal. Private funding, I think, works fine. It's kind of a shame, maybe, arguably, that people have to pay private tuition on top of what they're already being taxed for public schools. But people would argue, well, those are the people who are more well off anyway.
Well, public schools, let's say grade school through
high school.
Yeah. Is that all taxes? Is that some money from the state and then pretty much local property taxes or increases? Is that pretty much it?
Yeah, I would say it's mostly funded through property taxes. And
do they get any private, maybe like once in a while, donation or something, or is that
They might get grants. They actually do. Okay. And there's a scandal going on right now. There's a guy named Mitch Wexler who's doing a lawsuit on, this is a whole nother can of worms. But basically, schools have bonds that you can invest in, and they've been paying for these bonds by issuing new bonds. And so over time, they're rolling up the debt and increasing the interest rate, and they're basically creating a Ponzi scheme.
Bonds Ponzi scheme.
And so what Mitch Wexler found, and they're suing in Texas, and I think they're building cases a whole lot of other places, is that a lot of these schools are going bankrupt, and the way they are keeping from bankruptcy and covering themselves is they're going to the comptrollers and the appraisal district authorities, and they're saying, we need to find this much money in property taxes to cover the schools. And so they're basically pressuring the appraisal districts to commit fraud on the values of the houses so that they're taxed higher to cover these massive debts that are happening with the public schools right now.
That goes into
so many things.
Taxes and all sorts of things I want to complain about.
But stepping back from that whole giant mess,
education,
that horrifying, who knows what's going to happen there.
K through 12, and the cities and municipalities allow them to do their own private bonds. Is that just for Texas, or does that exist in most
I don't know all the details about what their conduct is with under what circumstances they can issue these. The point being that public schools are largely funded through their localities and the property taxes of the surrounding area.
Right. And
it makes sense, kind of, but it's really problematic for a lot of reasons. If you're someone who thinks that there's kind of racist institutions, systemic racist institutions, this would definitely be a cornerstone of that, where and I would take it more just are you a poorer demographic? Did you come from a more poor, undereducated community? This kind of lays a concrete foundation for that, where I live in a rough area, rough neighborhood, low education. My parents were low education. So we the houses are of really low value here, and so the property taxes are really low, and so the schools have shit funding, and now not only am I poor and struggling, but my kids have terrible education, and there's no upward mobility, even generationally. And so a lot of, I would say, disproportionately black voters advocate for charter schools where, fine, I pay taxes, right? Property taxes, so that my kid can get educated, but I don't want to be assigned to a school. I want a voucher so that I can choose which school my kid's going to, and then there's kind of this preference market system that comes into play, and the better performing schools are going to get more charter vouchers.
Do you agree with that?
I do.
I do too. I don't really see any of the arguments against it.
And it would be a way to make it more fluid and allow for upward mobility in these places where people are kind of locked into poor neighborhoods.
What I do question is private schools getting vouchers as well. That kind of, and where do private schools get their money if they don't get it from taxes? That kind of concerns me as far as, whose money is it? Where's the money from? Are they teaching specific ideologies? I've always wondered that. Especially in religious schools, I think that's mostly probably from churches and religions, I would assume.
Yeah.
Or maybe from religious individuals that are part of that religion.
And I don't know, the Friedman fan in me would be like, let the market decide. So it's like, is this school problematic because it's ideological? Maybe in some ways. Well, then why is it getting more vouchers than this more, I don't know, hard-nosed, no-nonsense model that is not performing as well? It's not as desirable. Yeah,
I don't know at the end, though, like in our future, because like right now we complain about how, Friedman's ideas are misused. Well, once somebody think that wouldn't we be doing the same thing with the education system, basically?
Yeah, and if I'm playing devil's advocate, kind of going into the schools, like putting way too much funding into like the nice athletic facilities, it's like you could just have a school that's super fun and like has all this super nice facilities, and it's like that could just become like a black hole of charter vouchers because they're the cool place to go.
Next door, you got like a rusted swing set that doesn't have seats for their swings.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who knows? I think it'd be interesting to. I think the important thing is to actually look to better ourselves and look for change. As long as we're doing that in all systems, I think, we'll have something to compare against, like you said before, And
it drives me crazy, the argument of, well, this is the way it is, and so therefore it must be the way to do things.
There's never a way there's always improvement that can be done. It's people's fear. People
are uncomfortable with the unfamiliar.
That's how politicians get things done, is they make, whatever side you're on, they use people's fear against them to get things passed. What about now?
Universities.
What about universities?
Yeah. Universities get funding in a lot of different ways. I would say a lot of them are kind of protected against market forces. They get bailed out in a lot of unique avenues. And they are more like that voucher school that wants the shiniest new equipment, the more fun place to be. And so, so they get grants through federal programs, like we're abiding by these things. We're doing medical research that will have scientific grants. They get endowments through the graduates and some of the more Ivy League schools. You start to get into the legacy system of like, well, this is one of our most generous donors, so of course we're going to allow their kids to get into the school. I don't know how common that is. Certainly an issue in the Ivy schools, and it's kind of degrading their reputation over time, I would argue. But also, the main way I'd say that they get funded is through tuition. And tuition used to be reasonable, and over the past couple generations, it's become like basically inducting people into indentured servitude, where they have these lifelong debt loads that are starting to garnish their retirement funds and Social Security because they have no hope of paying it off. Why are schools getting so expensive? Most people blame the bloated administrative staff in these schools, but I think the real reason is government subsidized loans.
Definitely. Yeah.
So, and this is becoming a problem with the housing, too. Houses are exploding in price because of government subsidized loans. But basically, when you issue a loan to the bank, when a bank issues a loan to you, let's say you want to buy a car, the bank will only get its money back and any interest if you are good to pay off that loan. So the bank is incentivized to scrutinize, well, what is your job? Are you currently working? What other assets do you have? What other debts do you have? And all of these kind of allow them to calculate how likely you are to pay off this loan. How reliable are you? Have you reliably paid off your debts in the past? That's kind of the concept of building credit. And when the government subsidizes loans, they basically guarantee them. They say, I don't even want you to look at Dave's background. Don't worry about it. If he defaults, I'll cover it. And so and how do they cover it? By adding to our national debt, inflating our dollar away, or ideally, it is covered, but by the taxpayer. So now you're kind of socializing the burden of everyone who signs up for college, but can't pay it off either because they took a crappy degree or they dropped out, whatever. And the reason that makes school so it's a burden on the broader society in two different ways. One is any loan that is outstanding now is covered by the taxpayer, and the other way is that it allows tuitions to explode in price. Because let's say you're having an auction and there's this nice painting that goes up for sale. That painting is going to go up for sale at a much lower value than if at the entrance there's a bank there that says, I don't need to look at your income. I don't have to look at whatever. I'll give you whatever loan you want to bid on this painting. And so there's no limit on the demand to enter college because there's no limit on what can actually be paid up front. And these poor kids sign up for these loans as like the first major financial decision they make with their life, not even understanding, hey, it's kind of a bitch to pay off loans, and sometimes I can't, and that really sucks when that happens. And hey, I can't, this is unique to student loans, I can't declare bankruptcy, so no matter what, this is gonna follow me around the rest of my life.
The problem I have with that is that there's so many options to pay back your loan. You could pay back if you only make a certain amount, and you can prove you can reduce your interest, you can only pay 1% a year or whatever. You can have a hold on your interest. They've got so many options on my Hill because I'm still paying off I'm keeping it for my credit,
Sure.
And it's hard to believe, but then I'm coming from a place now where I don't have to worry about food and things of that nature. But it's hard to believe you can't pay $40. I mean, you've seen all the YouTube videos where somebody would be like, I just can't pay anything on my loans. Where that guy, they've I forget what his name is, but he constantly goes through people's like accountant. He's basically does accounting for, and they're like, oh, I can't pay anything. It's like
Caleb Hammer, I think.
Yeah, something like. But he's like, you just went to Disney World for the third time this year with your friends, type of thing. And that's what you see more or less.
Also, people who are just royally screwed with how the loans were structured. But you're probably right that there's probably.
I think there are, but I think it's not the majority of the people probably.
Fair enough. But also, you got the job that you were kind of promised in your industry for pursuing this degree.
Right, as I said, I'm coming from a place where I'm already in. I pursued
so many
a job,
people, it's like, all right, I took out $80,000 to go to this really nice school, and then, I get out expecting to be, I don't know, a professor, and it's like, nope, you're working at Subway.
Yeah, and if you treat that like it is property, like your degree is property, like a house or whatever, has there ever been a time when the government has paid loans or, given away money either through grants or basically through loans without checking, where the industry hasn't ballooned? I can't think of a single time in history where the industry hasn't ballooned by, the government getting involved in it. And man, I'm trying to think. Shipping? No, there's shipping. There's oil subsidies, subsidizing. It did do its spot in farm and produce and in cheese. I think we're still doing a cheese. So I can't think of any.
But the consumer isn't taking out a freaking bank loan to cover their, their cheese that is 300 times as expensive as it should be. I mean, they're starting. I don't think they.
No, it's the farmers that actually grow the crops, though.
They're subsidized.
They're subsidized. Yeah. Okay. Otherwise, you get less and less farmers growing the crops, and then so we subsidize. I think it was corn. Dairy is highly subsidized. That would probably go down if Canada ever Canada's a huge problem with dairy because Canada has a lot of dairy too, and we could sell them dairy at dirt cheap, because we've got whole
because it's subsidized.
Yeah. Well, because we have so many people producing dairy and not enough. We've got warehouses of like 10-year-old cheese, acres and acres of just like warehouses up north here.
We're back on food again when we're talking about education.
Food's a good thing. Well, no,
food is a good thing.
We're talking about subsidizing.
Yeah.
So it's just good to draw parallels between the two. But
and there is one last kind of major income stream for universities, and that is the athletics. And it's like there's this cynical like, well, you want to be a top 10, what is it, the Big 10, like you want to be a Big 10 or March Madness type school where it's like, there's this kind of sexy sports industry that is like, I want to attend these games and see these up and coming athletes, and you get these massive state-of-the-art stadiums, and like the athletes get bribed with like mopeds and iPods. I remember at Madison, and not to call out Madison, but it's like everyone on the football team got a moped or something dumb like that.
Yeah,
and it's
big
like,
time.
It's like all these like basically bribes for like the athletes that make so much money for the schools, and then they don't get to see any of that, and it's just all and then you get to like up the tuition because you're a more attractive school that everyone wants to get into so they can have fun at these March Madness basketball games. That whole element of our education is pretty embarrassing to me, but
yeah, we had we had our tuition go up to build a new stadium when I was there, and and at the time, I played football, so I benefited from it. We had new weight facilities and all sorts of nice stuff, but at the same time, when I quit, it was like,
this is dumb.
I don't need any of this stuff, because it's the difference in college sports when you transition. There's a transition between like when something is completely team and it's team building to when it like turns more and more individualistic as time goes on, and you get these and That's kind of
Like
why
track and
I joined
field.
the military instead. Well, it's like more like people get less concerned about how your team does and how you do individually, I should say, probably.
Oh, you're talking about more the cult of personality thing where it's like, oh my gosh, this center basketball player.
Well,
or
it's
this
like a wide
quarterback.
receiver.
Yeah.
You're probably somebody I shouldn't be talking sports with, James.
Hell no.
No, but it's like a wide receiver. They get, if you look to the NFL, their team might have won, but the wide receiver's like, I only got passed two or three times this game.
Sure.
You know, I only touched the ball 2 or 3 times or whatever, and everybody gets upset about their stats and like, I didn't get any yards. I didn't get to run with the ball this much this game. I didn't get passed to.
Mm-hmm.
Or somebody gets taken out, like a quarterback, temporarily for some reason, or baseball, be a pitcher. You know, you give up a run. Is that Mao?
That's a half-hour warning here.
Before she starts yelling at you, I'm gonna keep that in, by the way. She can wear a pantsuit and start telling you to go on a long march.
Don't I know it?
To kill sparrows.
Don't come home without any game.
So, okay, those are you explained the funding models here. So how would you go about solving it?
To reiterate, out of all of those streams of revenue that the universities have, I guess real quick as an aside, they also sell like pharmaceutical intellectual property to the pharmaceutical industries if you are a kind of research type school. But anyway.
Yeah, well, they do have a little follow-up on that. They do get more grant money depending on how much you actually, like, how much research you do and whether it gets accepted. And then tenure is based on that as well. So, like, professors have to, like, constantly do research in order to get, additional funding or extra money. But, okay.
So out of all these streams of revenue, obviously the most problematic, in my view, is the government subsidized tuition. It's like,
right,
it's like it used to be, you get the boomers who are like, I don't know what the problem is. I, worked a summer job 2 years and paid off my whole tuition. Like, you lazy millennials not being able to pay off. It's like, well, because it's 300 times as expensive.
Right, and
now,
you're making 20% more while it's like 300% higher.
Right. So we need to abolish the government subsidized loans. If you're going to loan tuition to students, you have to make sure, that their parents are good for it. There has to be some risk involved with, like, I'm not going to sign up for an arbitrary number that is the first financial transaction. I was a child yesterday. I turned 18, graduated high school. Now I'm going to make like one of the biggest financial decisions of my life before ever interacting with the real economy. It's so stupid. We just need to abolish government subsidized bank loans for school. And I'm sorry that, like, I don't know how these schools are going to maintain their state-of-the-art facilities, but they kind of were disgusting about, enslaving all of these swaths of pupils anyway, so they can deal with it.
I agree with that on principle, but what I think they should do is like what the military does. Like, if the military, in order to better themselves, needs people in a particular position, they give you a bonus for signing up for that position.
Sure.
So I think loans should be available for things that our country needs, basically.
Okay.
Whereas, like, okay, if you're going to be a history major or an art history major, maybe not so much. But if we need more computer science type people, especially in particular fields, maybe your emphasis, maybe even it's just on an emphasis as well, like your AI type of thing or whatever. Say, okay, we're projecting this we're going to need 20,000 jobs, and instead of getting them from other countries, which we're doing right now with the visa program, before we do then we offer these loans out to Americans. And if we don't get enough there, then we can move on to the visa program. Temporarily, will that increase,
tuition for those fields that are undesirable in the first place?
It'll increase.
Because that would be the whole point
overall.
Is you want demand in these fields. So that's
it'll
why you're incentivizing
It'll
them.
increase it, but it should also incentivize paying more in the field. So it would still increase, the tuition, but not by as much because you're only doing it for particular fields that the country needs, maybe a handful.
So then,
rather than everybody. So you'd have everybody else paying a little bit more for the people that are going into the things that the country
need as a
actually
country.
need. Yeah. So I can see that as a compromise that is probably good for the country. I don't know why our country doesn't do that in the first place. I mean, I guess it's more of a freedom thing, individuality thing to not have that. But at the same time, that works good for the military. But at the same time, then the military, 10 years down the line, it's like we've got too many of these people because we miscalculated or whatever. But we're already doing that right now where we've got like 200 times more people in certain,
history professors than will ever be
like,
a history professor.
Yeah, you might get a position in 500 years.
Good luck.
The amount we got it.
Please
and
apply
you have to be the top. Right. It's just ridiculous. I mean, that way you're at least only off like 10, 20 years, whatever the cycle is, when they can reevaluate, rather than forever you being screwed and having a degree and nothing you can do.
Yeah.
Having to pay off working a waitress job or a waiter job.
Certainly what we shouldn't have is what we have now, where anyone for any major can get a government guaranteed subsidized loan for no cap on how much you can borrow.
Yeah, the cap is
so
ridiculous.
Insane.
Oh, that's another thing you do. Instead of doing that, you could like raise.
You can only borrow $10,000.
You could have a cap, yeah, and then
watch the tuition everywhere across the country just be limited to $10,000.
And then you could raise the cap possibly for certain things you need more. That's another way to do it.
Yeah, you could see that for doctors because their schooling is so much longer, but they get paid so well after.
Do they even get paid for being a fellow for 4 years? I think that's like scant pay.
What, an intern or resident?
The resident, yeah.
They do, but it's not well.
Right.
It's like 40 to 50 maybe. I don't know. I'm not a resident. I'm not a doctor. But yeah, that is the biggest problem with our education, at least financially, is the government subsidized loans.
Okay, that's reducing the price at college level. What about the huge problem of our grades right now, our standards in math and reading? I think it was some huge number of kids in inner city have extremely low reading scores and writing scores and math scores for that reason.
I think there was I don't know how it started, but there seemed to be kind of a hostility towards meritocracy that happened. And I think the schools had their incentive in that we want as many pupils as possible, and it would be great if we didn't have to worry about performance either. And so, yeah, keep butts in seats, keep collecting either tax money for truancy, because that's what a lot of the inner city schools are funded off of, is truancy, is a kid even showing up.
Right. But if your school's crap, what's the point of even going
exactly
there?
And so there's that issue. There's the teachers unions where it's like there's a, what is it, tenure. It's like people are like, we need to protect our teachers, like they're such important touchstones of society. And it's like, okay, but that's so many other professions, and they can get fired or they can like fail to compete. Why can't teachers? And so you get the results that you get because there's no mechanism for like, this teacher's a loser, they're not teaching anything, they're borderline abusive, get them out of there, get someone else who deserves that position, and maybe pay them more competitively.
Some of them go to like retirement and they change school districts and then work their way up to a double retirement type.
Yeah, I get like double pension. Ew.
See, my whole family pretty much has been, well, my separated family, not my direct family, but like cousins, aunts, uncles, they're all been teachers, every single one of them. And well, at least on one side, I think both sides. Some are professors on the other side. But they're really good at what they do, and they don't make probably enough pay. But the thing is that you don't get like people that care about their kids or whatever. You talk to them, they've got genuine caring, and they really do like critical thinking and encourage their kids, whatever. But the problem is that they see all teachers that way. They see all teachers as the way they are, and that is not the case in my experience, at least.
Sure. Well, and a lot of teachers do lament that they want to teach their kids in a better way, but so much of the teaching is, so much of the curriculum, so much of the way you teach is dictated by the Department of Education and that Common Core type model, which, I don't know, that probably, I think it's right that has degraded performance, and the idea of like no kid left behind, we're going to slow down if not everyone understands this lesson. I mean, that alone is going to...
Is Common Core only like math and STEM type stuff, or is that...
I don't know. The most ridiculous part of it, the part that everyone memes about online, is the math. It's like it teaches you the math, like multiplication tables, in this incredibly roundabout 10-step way where it's like, you know, cross division or multiplication has 2 steps to it. Why are you adding these 7 steps? And it's like, you have to draw this rectangle over here, and now you have to cross this guy out, and then you have to like recategorize it to this table. It's like, I don't know. It was math. It was a math process set up by bureaucrats.
Long form math. I don't mind that. Probably.
I don't know. Maybe we need to review some Common Core.
Yeah, that's, I think,
math videos where it's like, what are you even doing here?
Well, because a lot of those things, if you teach it to like, if you use the tens, the hundreds, or whatever, you can actually do that stuff like in your head by like reductions, you know, and they don't teach any of that.
They don't teach that because they want to make sure the lowest common denominator student. The slowest student can also grasp it, but it's like, okay, well, you're convoluting the process to make sure it's easier to understand. You're adding 8 unnecessary steps.
They should just be separated, and they should be like specialist schools. I think like the
that wouldn't be Common Core, and that probably points to why. That's probably a big part of why test scores have been on the decline.
Yeah,
but
well, reading straight across the board, as long as you're inner city. I think the voucher program, though, to go to other schools and whatnot, that's a good thing. That should help out, but at the same time, it's hard. I don't know, like if the busing is available, or if then like do you have to?
Oh, true.
There's like all sorts of things that I'm not familiar with. That I think there's probably bars to difficulty that aren't considered in that whole program.
That's
I think
true.
We should increase it if we really want, you know, an education equity.
Well, you might have to decouple the transportation system from the schools then. It's like it's not part of the school system that there's these buses busing kids. Maybe there's other services that are, you know, addressed some other way. I don't know. An Uber system.
Food deserts too. Getting back on food again.
Right.
I mean, there could be similar with education where, I mean, you know, we live close to a city. There's no food deserts in the suburbs. They're all like in the inner city, basically, if you want to get anything. I'm wondering if it could be the same with like, but who'd want to go there and work there unless they get extra pay, because the danger factor does go up.
Yeah.
You know, we both worked in the inner city for a few years, at least. Me a little bit longer with that one job than you. And I mean, people get mugged on the way to work in the morning, or they get carjacked, right? And it's like, I mean,
but that's, we're keeping those areas concentrated now. There used to be, or I mean, as far as cities go, cities kind of rejuvenate themselves all the time. There's kind of like the yuppie kind of, you know, the cycle of like a place gets shitty, the real estate gets cheap, artists move in, they make it interesting, the yuppies come in, and then they kind of corporatize everything, and it gets boring and overexpensive, and then crashes to like,
well, if they're allowed to, and they aren't like specifically drawn out by racial lines,
right,
unintentionally, like Milwaukee.
Right. But I think that, again, the voucher system would help to delocalize a lot of that segregation.
North Milwaukee is terrible. I think you're talking about, I think it's where you lived previously, like Southeast Milwaukee. That used to be different. And that wasn't drawn in racial lines, and people can come in there. I think that was real popular for a few years, though. Mm-hmm. Where was that? That where you lived? Or I shouldn't probably share that.
Yeah, that's fine. But
yeah.
So I don't know, what are we talking about, funding right now, or what were we talking
funding,
about?
Yeah, local funding as far as like bars restrictions. Like if North Milwaukee, if they pay, they've got really low housing taxes or whatever. But if they were to pay locally then their city, I don't know which high school that would be. Rufus King, no, would
well, related to this bond fraud, they might not have a choice soon, because Mitch Wexler is trying to bring this property taxes to the Supreme Court, challenge the constitutionality of property taxes, because it's unrealized gains. And so the 16th Amendment says that you can, he has an argument for why it's unconstitutional on the basis of several amendments, but one of the main ones is the 16th says you can fund income, or you can tax income. And it's like, what income? I didn't sell the house. I didn't get any money in. So why are you taxing me just because my house theoretically appreciated in value? And why are you not collecting that tax then fine when I sell the house and get the income?
Yeah. It makes sense.
So
I think they'll win on that.
They're using it as a basis for all this bond fraud.
They'll lose, I think, if they want it to be they don't pay anything. But I think if they swap it to like when they sell the house. Because did you know, like, no one actually owns property in the U.S.?
Yeah.
It's like,
if you default on your taxes, if you don't pay your taxes, so the best you can do is pay off your mortgage and rent the property.
The government owns all the land, and if you buy land or a house, the government's actually loaning that out to you.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's crazy.
When did that start?
Forever. That's the way it's been since the beginning. So that's why like people can just like get kicked off their land to like build
wow, so it was like kind of like a mercantile system, and you could see like the federal government,
I don't know,
incentivizing people with the pioneers, and like, yeah, you know, we're distributing this lot to you. And
in practice, I don't know how that works, or if that actually is not longer in practice. Longer in practice. Sure. So I'll have to look at that up, because I saw that and I was just like, what? And it's like, well, that's why the governments can do like pretty much they can tell you whatever the heck they do, because otherwise that's your own property.
It makes sense with like the title companies and everything. It's like you have like these very definitive lines of your property, and it's like that's got to be maintained by a central system. And so it's like, yeah, okay, interesting.
Yeah, it's in the land use, get into land use and stuff like that. So I'm wondering, well, education.
Yeah, that's for another. Anyway, so I don't know. I think a lot of these problems are just naturally going to fall away, ironically, through the Udemy model. And these just people have access to education on a much more dynamic and agile way. They can go at their own pace. They can choose what they're learning. Part of what was so stupid about my college degree is like I had to take these classes, and I really wanted to take a psychology class because I was naturally interested in it. And it's like, nope, you have to take a 5th semester of chemistry for your degree in computer programming, where I guarantee I will never, ever, ever, ever touch anything involved with chemistry.
That is to do in your school, though. That's not.
Either way, it's a stupid model. Or that was a dumb aspect of like the standard.
Wisconsin?
Yeah, the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
You could have taken any science.
For my double major, I had to. This was the way that I could minimize the classes.
What was your other?
Computer science and computer engineering.
Okay, was it computer engineering that had you take chemistry?
I mean, I guess there's some chemicals.
That makes sense,
but
yeah.
5 semesters? Like, why am I... OChem? Why am I taking organic chemistry as a
just another relationship
engineer?
Between electricity and
stupid.
Different chemicals and whatnot, different chemical composition.
Don't defend them.
No, I don't think it makes sense, but
anyway, I do think the technology is advancing in a way where, and there is this clearly promising model of like, take classes online at your own pace. And, you know, you can take them one class at a time as a ride-on, and maybe you get certificates, and it's more about, can you actually do the skill?
Especially with AI integration, it's going to be so much easier online,
Yeah.
I think, than in the classroom actually, like, integrating that.
The big miss there, the big con that you don't get, you're losing that you had in school is the social interactions and social development skills. And, you know, yeah, we need to explore mentorship. We need to challenge, I think, you were born in this grade, these are the people you interact with your whole way through school, everyone's sitting facing the same direction, graded on what's regurgitated by the teacher. There's just so many ways that it's overly structured in ways that like don't suit our current world, and we need more variety, more experimentation. And
True.
That's all I've got to say on the matter.
Let me think. Any follow up here? We covered subsidized loans, possibly fixing those, possibly moving on with the coupons or vouchers
Voucher
to go to other
system.
schools. What about, I wonder, what about Western European countries that provide free schooling basically on a state? What do you think about them as far as like, say maybe like a Finland or a Sweden or something like that?
Well, they're kind of on the same scale as like a state, a U.S. state. So and their demographics are a lot more homogenized, not just racially but class-wise. You know, there's a lot less. What do they call it? Wealth distribution or lack thereof.
Less disparity between classes. I
Right.
guess.
So I think it's easier when it's monoculture, when it's, you know, not as variant as far as the wealth of people. They're already social in a lot of ways that it's hard to compare. They're like they're not indebted. You know, they have this massive surplus with oil or.
That's my point to you with healthcare, though. It's like each state is like its own country practically. So it's like the costs in the U.S. are going to vary widely. They already do vary widely, but
And
I think education would be the same.
I would want everything to kind of go to the state so that they can experiment more. If they are costlier, why are you dragging the rest of the country down? Why is my home insurance expensive because people choose to live in Florida where they have to rebuild every 2 years? It's like, stop moving to Florida. Like, shoulder your own insurance or choose not to be insured as a state. But like, why is that affecting my insurance here?
Because we're basically subsidizing Florida
Yes.
with all our insurance. And then you got,
They're stupid mistakes to keep building on limestone.
I think there are some negotiations which might have to be made, would be more difficult at the state level. Let's say importing drugs, things like that. Or getting drugs federally tested, which we do overly stringent, and we always, with a focus on our big pharma, because I think things like those would be difficult. But we don't do a good job now, so yeah, might as well return it to the states because our education system is not doing well right now. Everybody's
And
got a job though.
Please
so.
don't attack me, internet or family, for saying Trump might have a point. But as far as like performance of the Department of Education and how standardized everything is and how poor the performance has been increasingly in our state of education, I think we need to at least start having conversations
Your family
about.
will never watch this.
Yeah, fair enough.
Should have your
Fair
mom
enough.
watch it. She'd watch it probably,
Yeah.
but no one else.
But we should have conversations about how we can do education differently because the world is changing very fast and people don't work in factories anymore. We have to find a way to coexist with AI that is going to take even more jobs.
Different time,
Different time. Yeah, maybe we should start considering ourselves civilians again and not consumers. Maybe
we need to change education system for modern audiences.
Yeah, true. Alrighty.
All right.
See you
Thank you
next time.
for watching. This has been Civic Engines.
Bye.
We're gone. Bye.